Nowadays, Heist is merely viewed as a joke of a game mode, with each new Hypercharge released being an absolute menace. Most games have turned into a contest of who can get their broken super and then Hypercharge first, and use it on the opponent's Heist safe. Sure, there are still some elements that require actual thought, but it's nowhere compared to the old days. Back then, each game required a lot more skill, slowly gaining control of the map and chipping away damage at the safe, before finally getting a push to get significant damage on the safe and win the game. In this video, I'm going to talk about how Heist fell so far, and some of the brawlers and reasons that caused it to fall, and how it could potentially be fixed. As always, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on the video and Heist as a whole. Also, join our Discord server for a chance to win Pop Penny through our gauntlet. Also, let me know of any video ideas you want me to do, and I'll add them to my video list. Heist. Love it or hate it, it's one of the most iconic game modes in Brawl Stars, and even had a stint in Clash Royale. But first, let's talk about what Heist actually is. Heist is a game mode in which two teams fight to protect their own safe, and destroy the opponent's safe. The safe has a mind-boggling health of 80,000, or at least it seems mind-boggling, but in a real game, a few nicely aimed hypercharges, and the safe will be more gone than even Playboy Cardi. As bad as Heist seems now, it's nowhere near as bad as it once was. In beta, Heist worked a lot differently to what it's now. It had an attacking and a defending team every game with only one safe. If the attacking team destroyed the safe, they won the game, and if the defending team successfully defended the safe after the full duration of the game, they won. For obvious reasons, this was completely unbalanced and will shortly change to the current game mode we know and hate. But this isn't a history video, so that's enough about Heist history trivia. So let's go on to the general meta and gameplay in Heist before the damage inflation apocalypse. Yeah, I just made up that word. Anyway, Heist before the advent of damage inflation was a very interesting and thought-provoking game mode. There was a prevalence of actually building teams with different roles other than damage, and you guessed it, even more damage. Despite all of this damage inflation nowadays, pro play still has a semblance of this picking of multiple roles, which is why you often see unconventional picks in Heist. No, I'm not gonna mention it. Okay, fine. I guess I will. Kit, 011, Juan Carlos. Happy? Let's move on. Let's take an example of a Heist map we all know too well. Kaboom Canyon. In this map, there were multiple combinations you could use, but there were some specific roles in that map that worked especially well. First and obviously, you have got the damage dealer for Heist damage. This was a very wide role that could be fulfilled by anyone from Colt, to Penny, to Grom. Next, you got the bush controller in the middle. This could be fulfilled by Nita, who could also double as a safe damage dealer. Other brawlers that could thrive in the control in the middle were Tara, Meg, Gale, Bull, and the list goes on and on. And finally, you would have the marksman, for the range of the map, wall break if needed, and extra damage on the safe. This could be someone like Piper, Brock, or Nani. You could see how the multiple roles synergize in order to create a perfect comp for the map, covering different areas and focusing more on just controlling their way to victory, rather than just pure, unadulterated damage. Sure, it still exists somewhat today, but now it's more reliant on having more damage potential than the opponents, than as a pure strategy due to the amount of damage potential that such a comp would miss out on, due to brawlers like Melody, Chuck, Crow, or Colette existing. Speaking of roles, let's talk about some roles that used to be very good in Heist, and how they were good. First off, there were brawlers that dealt massive damage up close. Examples include brawlers like Daryl, Bull, and El Primo. Obviously, they weren't a great pick on extremely open Heist maps, though in a map like the aforementioned Kaboom Canyon, these guys can definitely pack a punch. This was obviously before the Great Tank Apocalypse, and so tanks were still usable. But even more importantly, this was before hypercharges, so tanks could still be played without feeding enemies hypercharges that could change the outcome of the game. And with competent teammates, the tank could easily move up the map and gain their super to be able to get to the safe. The mobility of these tanks, which allowed them to get to the safe extremely quickly once they got their super, made them a very powerful threat. And coupled this with the extremely large amount of damage at a close range they could deal, leaving one of these guys on the safe for too long would be deadly. Obviously, this wasn't a foolproof strategy. Your opponent could go a tank counter, who could also either control/deal damage, like Crow or Colette, turning you into a liability, though not as much of a liability as you would be in the current era of hypercharges. But still, with a good comp around you, you could still be relied upon to be a contributing member of the team and deal massive amounts of safe damage that could change the tide of the game. Secondly, there were brawlers who had solid DPS and good range. Examples include Colt, Piper, Nani, Lola, and 8-Bit. These brawlers would be the most reliable dealers of safe damage. They could also hold their own against most other brawlers, and had the range to be able to take care of most brawlers. The large range they had was also important for keeping safe while still dealing safe damage, which was very important for chipping away at the safe. They wouldn't deal the most amount of damage, but it was still enough to make a big difference in the game, as well as provide a platform that someone like a tank or a turret brawler, which I'm also going to talk about next, could exploit to win the game. Thirdly, there were turret brawlers. Some examples of turret brawlers are Penny, Jessie, and Nita. These were brawlers who relied heavily on their super to be good in heist, but once they got their super, it could change the whole tide of the game. Therefore, these brawlers had to be protected once they charged up their super, as it was important to keep them alive, as most of them were pretty weak on their own. Jessie or Nita could easily destroy the safe with just 3 to 4 well-timed supers, especially with their unlockables helping out. Penny was another story, and lead more into controlling while slowly chipping away at the safe with her super, while also having to defend it for most of the game, since it was more of a passive super than both Jessie's and Nita's. Obviously, there were a lot more roles than this, like controlling roles, defending roles, and throwers in general, but nobody wants to hear about all of that, so I'm keeping it brief. But you get the point. None of these roles were too powerful, and they all relied on each other to win the game together, which is extremely important. In most heist games, you couldn't just carry your team to victory, because either your teammates couldn't deal enough safe damage, or you couldn't deal against their entire team, or vice versa. But at some point, this changed. The game of multiple roles combining to help chip damage on the safe changed into a game of multiple damage dealers fighting with each other and destroying the safe within a few shots. Okay, that's a little bit of a hyperbole, but you get my point. But now, let's begin looking at how the downfall of heist began. And would you look at that? To absolutely no one's surprise is the release of Hypercharges. In the first batch of Hypercharges, Shelly, Spike, Colt, Bull, Jackie, and Pearl all got Hypercharges. Obviously, the concept of Hypercharges is already very good in heist, as it gives a way to deal even more damage to the heist safe without the heist safe health getting buffed. Colt, Bull, and Spike all became meta heist brawlers because of this. They all were already solid in heist, but their abilities, along with the damage boost, made them so much better. Colt got even more damage to absolutely shred the safe. Spike got more damage and a bigger radius to prevent people from getting close to the safe, which meant that he could safely damage it with his projectile gadget. And Bull gained an important shield to help him stay alive for longer in order to get to the safe and deal massive damage. But that wasn't all, as in this update, brawlstars introduced Chuck. Chuck fundamentally broke the game of heist, which was all about using your teammates to help push up the map in order to damage the safe. Chuck could just use his post to move up the map by himself, going from his side to the map to the opponent's heist safe, dealing a solid 10% of damage or more, before coming back and defending. Combine this with Hypercharges, and the first seeds of heist downfall have been planted. However, it wasn't all over just yet, as the amount of brawlers that had these broken abilities was still very limited, and could be counteracted by other brawlers due to the limited amount of them and the fact that they still had some flaws. And then the next batch of Hypercharge released, and suddenly heist was looking bruised and battered. In this batch of Hypercharges, both Jessie and Colette received Hypercharges. Jessie's Hypercharge saw her turret health grow by a large amount, making it so that Jessie's turret couldn't be removed as easily as before. As I said earlier, Jessie's turret was one of the main reasons she was meta in heist, so a buff to that turret basically made her one of, if not the best, heist brawler. This was also before many Hypercharges released, so it was extremely difficult to get rid of her turret, or even compete with its damage output. Colette's Hypercharge was absolutely broken in heist. It dealt insane damage to the heist safe and if she aimed it well enough, she could recharge her super, basically allowing her to shred half the safe with just a singular hypercharge. As you can guess, these hypercharges, coupled with the hypercharges of last update, basically made it so that even one of these brawlers could solo the safe, with basically no help from teammates other than in eliminating enemies. Thus, it made it essential to have one of these brawlers, and if you or your team didn't have one of these brawlers, you would most likely lose. Imagine this: you constantly mow down your enemies and get important chip damage on the opposing safe, but the opposing team manages to get just one good team wipe, and a hypercharge Colette with just one super completely erases the lead you worked so hard for. Not so fun, right? But it gets even worse. Edgar, Dynamite, and most importantly, Crow's hypercharge all released in the next update. Edgar and Dynamite were already not too bad picks in Heist, but this just allowed them to become even more powerful and deal even more damage to the suffering Heist safe. But it was Crow's hypercharge that spelled doom for Heist. It allowed Crow to deal absolutely ridiculous amounts of damage to the safe, and if aimed perfectly, it could deal around half the safe health. Half. Are you kidding me? Half? There are no words for this. Granted, it did take a while to charge up, but still, one singular button, and you could basically turn the tide of the entire game. But even worse, now that Crow's hypercharge had released, other brawlers need to get even more broken hypercharges to allow them to compete with Crow's, leading to a twisted arms race of Heist destroying ability. Sprout, BB, Nita, Barley, Angelo, Piper, Rico, Squeak, 8-Bit, Daryl, Penny, Barry, and Melody are all some brawlers that receive broken hypercharges that either allow them to destroy the Heist safe or accentuate an already powerful Heist brawler, like in the case of Melody, Nita, and Daryl. With all of these new and powerful brawlers for Heist, it was actually a little bit of a positive. There was no longer as much of a power disbalance, with only a few brawlers being at the top of the meta. Now, there were multiple brawlers that could equal each other for damage, making the mode a little bit more balanced between teams. But you know who wasn't balanced for? The Heist safe. It's been over a year since the last boost to the Heist safe's health. To put this into context, approximately 0 hypercharges were released when the Heist safe last received a health buff. In case you haven't realized already, all of these hypercharges have power creeped the Heist safe, basically making the safe extremely weak in comparison to its older self. In turn, this means the Heist safe's health will go down quicker, reducing the amount of time spent in a game. This leads to less tactical gameplay focused on chipping the safe health down and gaining control of the map, and is instead more based on just getting to your opponent's safe as quick as you can and destroying it before your opponents get to your safe, or as it is famously called, a base race. As I alluded to earlier, a singular push can be the difference between winning and losing, and that's just not healthy for this game mode. It's becoming more like my personal least favorite mode, which is gem grab, where the enemy can focus all of their energy just to one push, and even if you dominate the rest of the game, you still lose due to that one push that was less based on skill and more on a combination of brawler choice and luck. I mean, I suppose it could be considered a skill issue, but that's beside the point. So how do we fix this power creep in Heist and lengthen the time span of the game? Unfortunately, we can't just undo the broken hypercharges for Heist, so we're gonna have to work around that, while also keeping in mind that more and more hypercharges that will be extremely good in Heist will be released. First and most obvious, just buff the safe health. It hasn't been buffed since before the Great Heistpocalypse, and I've definitely said that word too many times, but it's in desperate need of a health upgrade. Now, I'm not the best with balance change numbers, I'm gonna admit, but I think a health buff to 100,000 from 80,000 should be good, and it allows for an aesthetically pleasing number to be the Heist safe health instead of some just random number. But seriously, let me know if this would work or would be overkill in the comments below. I've heard a lot of talk about how the Heist safe should get a turret that damages enemies. That might be a fun idea to implement. It could make the Heist safe be a sort of a last line of defense, working to help counteract some of the broken brawlers on the safe, like a Melody, a Jessie Hyper turret, or a Hypered Bruce. It shouldn't deal too much damage as to where it becomes an active threat, but it should do damage similar or less than that of Jessie's turret. Of course, this can be very frustrating if you can manage to team wipe the enemies and finally get to the enemy's safe, just to get killed by a stupid turret. Overall, Heist has become one of the most power creep modes in the game, if not the most. The advent of hypercharged brawlers that are good in Heist have twisted a game based on slowly gaining control and moving up the map, and chipping away at safe health to a base race of ultimate damage, with the main loser not being one of the two sides, but being the Heist safe. Though these hypercharged brawlers can't be undoed, the safe itself can receive upgrades in order to help itself combat against power creep and these Heist destroyers. Finally, a big thanks to Bronze Knight for helping me out with some of the topics behind this video. Anyway, thanks for watching. Watch this video, or this playlist, or join the Discord server.